Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we've got something pretty interesting lined up, and it's a question that speaks directly to something you wanted to know more about.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned you're a devoted Catholic
Hmm.
and wanted to learn more about incorporating the Immaculate Heart and the Green Scapular into your spiritual practice.
Well, that's a great topic.
Yeah, and to help us dive deep into this, we're going to be looking at a book from 1923 called The Green Scapular and Its Favors.
Oh, wow. 1923.
Yeah, it's a pretty old one,
That's
but
fascinating.
it really digs into the origins of this devotion, and it shares some incredible stories about how it's impacted people's lives.
I always love those older sources. You know, they have a kind of a different feel to them.
They do, yeah. It's like a window into the past.
Yeah, and what I find particularly interesting about this book is that it was written by a priest, Father Mott, who was also a doctor of divinity.
Oh, wow.
So he actually had access to the archives of the Daughters of Charity and knew many of the people involved in spreading this devotion.
That's amazing. So we're really getting it straight from the source.
Yeah, it's as close as we can get, I think, to the horse's mouth.
Now, the book centers around a woman named Sister Justine Biskiburu, who was a daughter of charity and played a crucial role in bringing the Green Scapular to the world.
I've heard of her.
But what's interesting is that this wasn't just some idea she came up with,
Right.
It was rooted in something much deeper.
Yeah, she reportedly had visions of the Virgin Mary, and that's where it all started.
Really?
Yeah, and these visions started way back when she was just a novice.
Wow. So this was a recurring theme in her life then.
It seems that way, and ultimately those visions led to the revelation of the Green Scapular.
So it wasn't just a random thought or inspiration, it was a direct revelation.
Exactly. In 1840, Mary appeared to her holding her Immaculate Heart and a green scapular.
That's powerful.
It is, and it wasn't just a fleeting image. The Virgin Mary gave her very specific details about the scapular's design and even the prayer that was supposed to be on it.
Wow. So this wasn't just like, here's a scapular. It was very detailed instructions.
Absolutely. I think it's important to emphasize that detail because it speaks to the intentionality of the whole thing.
Right. It wasn't just a random symbol. It had a specific purpose.
Exactly. Now,
Let's talk about that prayer for a second because that seems to be really important.
absolutely.
So what did it say?
The prayer is, Immaculate Heart of Mary, pray for us now and at the hour of our death.
I love that prayer. It's so simple, but so powerful.
It is. You're asking for Mary's help, not just in our daily lives, but as we approach the end of our earthly journey.
Right. It's like having her there with us every step of the way.
Yeah, and I think for someone like our listener who's already devoted to Mary, that's a really powerful thing to consider.
It is. It's
Yeah.
like a direct line to her heart, especially when we need it most.
Exactly. Now, what's really fascinating to me is that the scapular wasn't just meant to be a personal object of piety.
So it had a broader purpose.
Yes, the Virgin Mary specifically said it was a tool for conversion, especially for those who had strayed from the faith or didn't even know Christ.
So it was about bringing people back to God.
Exactly, bringing them back to the church, bringing them into the fold.
That's amazing.
Mm.
And it makes me think about how we can use this scapular today,
Yeah.
not just for ourselves,
Yeah.
but for others who might need that extra nudge.
Right. It's almost like a spiritual outreach tool.
It is. And the book actually shares some amazing stories about how this worked in practice.
Oh, yeah.
I love those kinds of stories. They really bring it to life.
They do. Do you want to hear one?
Oh, definitely. Hit me with your favorite.
Okay, so there's a story of Mr. Copen, a man who had no faith at all, despite his friends' efforts to bring him to God.
So he was like a hardened non-believer.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it wasn't until he was on his deathbed that things changed.
What happened? Was there a sudden miracle?
Not in the way you might think. It wasn't a physical healing.
Okay.
His friend got him a green scapular and placed it near him.
Oh, wow.
And shortly after, Mr. Copen experienced a profound conversion.
That's amazing.
He confessed his sins, received communion, and then died peacefully.
Wow. So even in those final moments, the green scapular had an impact.
It's a powerful testament to Mary's intercession, especially because he had been so resistant to faith before that.
It really makes you think about the potential of this devotion to reach even the hardest of hearts.
It does. And this wasn't just an isolated incident. The book is full of these kinds of stories.
So the green scapular was already gaining traction back then.
Absolutely. And not just on a grassroots level, the book mentions that a priest working for the Vatican, Father Borgogno, personally presented the green scapular to Pope Pius IX.
Wow, that's a big deal.
It is. It shows how seriously this devotion was being taken.
So what did the Pope think?
Well, he examined it carefully and then gave permission for the Daughters of Charity to make and distribute the scapulars.
Wow, so it had official approval.
Yeah, it was a huge moment for Sister Justine and everyone who believed in the power of the green scapular.
It's like it was becoming an established practice within the church.
Exactly. And later on, Pope Pius XI even kept a green scapular on his desk, along with the miraculous medal.
That says a lot.
It does. It shows how highly regarded this devotion became.
So we've talked about the origins of the green scapular and its growing popularity.
Yep.
You mentioned earlier that there were stories of healing associated with it, too.
Yeah.
Were these mostly physical healings?
It's actually a mix. The book talks about physical, spiritual, and even some that are hard to categorize.
Interesting.
For example, there's this story of a woman who had gangrene in her leg.
Oh, wow. That's serious.
The doctors thought they'd have to amputate.
Oh, no.
But she was a woman of great faith and started praying with the green scapular, and she made a complete recovery.
Wow, that's incredible.
It makes you wonder if there's a connection between spiritual and physical healing.
Right, it's like the scapular helped her connect to a power that could heal on both levels.
Exactly. And I think that brings us to an important point. The green scapular is connected to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But there's a deeper relationship there that I think we need to explore.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. What exactly is the connection between the scapular and the Immaculate Heart devotion?
Well, think of it this way. The scapular isn't just a symbol.
Okay.
It's a tangible expression of our devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary.
So it's like carrying a piece of that devotion with us.
Exactly. And when we wear the scapular and say the prayer,
Right.
we're actively asking for her intercession. We're seeking refuge in her Immaculate Heart.
I see. So it's not just a passive thing. It's an active way to connect with Mary.
Exactly. And that's what makes this devotion so powerful. And for someone like our listener, who already has a strong devotion to Mary, the green scapular can really take that relationship to a whole new level.
It's like building on something that's already there.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about personal piety.
Right.
The green scapular is also about sharing that devotion with others.
Especially those who might need it most.
Exactly. Like those who have maybe drifted away from the church or never really knew Christ.
Right. It's like we're called to be little missionaries spreading the love of Mary.
Exactly. And it makes me think about the Immaculate Heart itself.
Yeah, let's talk about that because I think some people might be wondering what exactly is the Immaculate Heart?
Right.
And why should we care about it?
Well, the Immaculate Heart is a beautiful concept. It represents Mary's perfect purity, her love for God, and her compassion for all of us.
So it's more than just a physical heart. It's like a symbol of her whole being.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And the green scapular, with that image of the flaming heart and the prayer,
Right.
it becomes a way to connect with that essence,
Yeah.
to draw strength from her example.
I can imagine someone going through a really tough time holding onto that scapular and feeling a sense of peace, knowing that Mary is there for them.
That's a beautiful image,
Sure.
and it really gets to the heart of this devotion.
Right.
It's about finding comfort in Mary's love, no matter what we're going through.
Speaking of comfort, I'm curious about Sister Bixby Biru's own experiences. The book mentions that she was really humble and didn't like to talk about her visions.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Why do you think that was?
I think it shows the true nature of her faith. It wasn't about seeking attention or personal glory. It was about serving God and doing what she felt called to do.
It's like she understood the sacredness of those visions.
Right. It wasn't something to be exploited or bragged about.
Exactly. And it wasn't until she was on her deathbed that she finally shared more details about those visions with her fellow sisters.
That's right. She described Mary appearing in a long white gown with a light blue mantle and her hair flowing down.
It's like a scene from a painting.
It is, and you can tell that those details weren't meant for public consumption.
Right.
It was a private sharing, a sacred moment between her and her sisters.
And even her death had a special significance.
Oh, yeah.
She passed away on the anniversary of St. Vincent's ordination to the priesthood.
What a beautiful coincidence.
It is St. Vincent being the founder of the Daughters of Charity.
It makes you think that there was a divine plan at work throughout her whole life.
It does. It's like
Okay.
all the pieces fit together perfectly.
Exactly. And I think for someone like our listener who's already walking a path of faith, Sister Bixby Biru's story offers a really inspiring example of what it means to surrender to God's will.
Right. It's about saying yes to whatever mission God has for us.
Exactly. And for someone who might be thinking about incorporating the green scapular and the Immaculate Heart devotion,
Right.
what would you say are the key takeaways from her story?
Well, I think it reminds us that these devotions aren't just about external practices, you know?
Right.
It's about cultivating a deep and personal relationship with Mary,
Exactly.
allowing her love to change us from the inside out.
That's a great way to put it. But, let's bring this back to the practical level for a second.
Okay.
If our listener decides to embrace these devotions, how can they do it in a way that feels authentic and meaningful to them?
That's a good question. It's not just about wearing the scapular.
Right.
It's about incorporating it into a life of prayer and action,
Absolutely.
maybe by spending time with that prayer. Immaculate Heart of Mary, pray for us now and at the hour of our death.
Yeah.
And really thinking about what it means to have Mary's intercession in our lives.
And it's about approaching this devotion with an open heart and a humble spirit, allowing Mary's love and the power of her Immaculate Heart to work within us.
Right. It's not about expecting instant miracles or a sudden conversion.
Exactly.
It's about developing a steady and growing relationship with Mary.
And for someone who already has a strong devotion,
Right.
it could be a way to deepen that understanding of Mary's role in our salvation and to draw even closer to her Immaculate Heart.
It's about finding a tangible expression of that love and letting it shape our lives.
Exactly. And it's about trusting in the power of sacramentals,
Right.
these physical objects that, when used with faith, can really open us up to God's grace.
It's like the green scapular becomes a reminder of that invisible connection to Mary's Immaculate Heart.
It does. And for those who choose to wear it, it can be a real source of comfort, strength, and guidance.
Now that we've talked about this, I'm remembering something important.
What's that?
Our listener is a devout Catholic, already familiar with prayer and sacramentals.
Right.
But this deep dive has shown us another side to the green scapular.
Yeah.
It's not just a personal devotion.
Right.
It also has this mission of conversion, especially for those who don't know Christ or have strayed from the faith.
Absolutely. The Virgin Mary wanted it to be used as a tool to bring souls closer to God.
So for our listener, it's not just about their own relationship with Mary.
No.
It's also about using this devotion to help others.
Exactly. Maybe by sharing the scapular with someone who needs it, praying for their conversion, or even just talking about their faith.
It's about being an ambassador for Mary's love.
And that's really the most beautiful part of this devotion. It's not just about personal piety. It's about sharing that love with the world.
Right. Especially in a world that often feels so lost and disconnected from God.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think the question for our listener is not just, should I do this?
Right.
But how can I let this devotion change me and inspire me to share God's love with others?
It's a powerful question that I hope they'll keep thinking about.
I do too.
Yeah, it really is a powerful question.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to where we started, with our listener's question about whether to incorporate the Immaculate Heart and the green scapular
Right.
into their spiritual practice.
And what's so interesting is that there's no easy answer.
It's not just a yes or no kind of.
Exactly. It's about that personal discernment, listening to that inner voice.
Right. It's about figuring out how these devotions resonate with them personally.
Because faith isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It's a journey.
Exactly. And for someone like our listener who's already so devoted to their Catholic faith,
Yeah.
it's about exploring how these devotions can add to what they're already doing.
Right. Maybe deepen their connection to Mary and help them live out their faith in an even more meaningful way.
It's like seeing the green scapular,
Yeah.
not just as a piece of cloth,
Right.
but as a real symbol of Mary's presence, a reminder of her love, and a call to share that love with the world.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about weaving these devotions into everyday life,
Right.
letting them be a source of strength and comfort.
So for our listener who's trying to decide whether to embrace these devotions, what final thoughts would you leave them with?
Well, I would say go back and really think about everything we've talked about today.
Right.
The history of the green scapular, the power of the Immaculate Heart, and all those stories of conversion and healing.
And most importantly,
Yeah,
listen to your heart.
absolutely.
Pray for guidance and ask Mary to show you how she wants to work in your life.
Because ultimately, it's all about opening ourselves up to God's grace, letting Mary's love change us,
Right.
and then becoming that love for others.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive, and I think our listener has a lot to think about.
I agree. And I hope that whatever they decide, they'll keep growing closer to Mary and find peace and refuge in her Immaculate Heart.
Thank you all for joining us on this journey of discovery. And until next time, may God's peace be with you.